There are 5 different printmaking processes, and I'd like to describe where Mokulito sits in amongst these other processes. There's Intaglio Printing, which is generally done on copper and zinc and other metals, and this involves etching into a plate either through scraping or etching with acid, and the ink generally sits in those troughs where the blue line is in that illustration. With relief printing, you carve away the valleys of the mountains, and it's a bit like the Grand Canyon. The ink and the blue ink sits on top of the flat areas of those mountains, and when you run it through the press, it actually picks up the ink off the raised areas in that relief print. The next one is stencil printing or silkscreen printing, where you block out areas either with a block out material or with a liquid, and then when you run the squeegee over the top with the ink, it presses through the silkscreen and prints onto the substrate underneath, either paper or fabric, depending on what you're using. The fourth one is lithographic process, which is probably the closest to Mokulito, and it's a planographic process, which simply means it's done on a flat surface area, and where you've put the grease on that flat surface, the ink sticks to that area, and you process the other negative areas with the gum arabic, which makes it hydrophilic, and it grabs the water and stops the ink from sticking to the areas which haven't got the grease on it. The fifth process is the digital process, which is done on a screen, and that usually involves either pixels in something like Photoshop or vector images in Illustrator. So there are the 5 main printing processes. So Mokulito sits close enough to the stone lithographic process. In the late 70s, Azaku Shizi was a professor at Teimei University in Japan, and he was very disappointed that his master's students in stone lithography could not do stone lithography at home. So all that work that they put in to learn about stone lithography, they went home and could never do it again. So he developed, or started to develop, an alternative and did quite a lot of experimentation over a number of years and came up with Mokulito, which is wood lithography. And he came up with the concept of actually putting grease onto wood instead of stone, and came up with an alternative to stone lithography. It is a poor cousin, but it has strengths of its own. It's very experimental, and you can end up with some really, really strong, interesting images as well. As far as the pros and cons of one is against the other, the advantage of Mokulito is that it's incredibly portable. Plywood is very light, it's easy to cut, it's environmentally friendly. You don't need to go to stone quarries in Germany to get the stone. So it's very economical to do as well. And as I said earlier, it's also a very good experimental process. You can also combine drawn images with cutting into the block, so it's almost a cross between lithography and woodcut as well. As far as stone lithography is concerned, you can do large additions with stone lithography once you've embedded the image into the stone itself, whereas with Mokulito you can only do very short runs of between 6 and 10 at the most. Obviously the stones are incredibly heavy. You need scissor lifts to move them around, and you also need a fairly dedicated press, a lithographic press, in order to print, whereas with Mokulito you can simply use either a baron, a Japanese baron, or alternatively an etching press to print with it as well.